Welcome to the IJIS Institute Sounds of Safety podcast, where our community will be delving into a series of critical issues supporting the public sector mission space. In this episode, we will dive deep into the power of NIEM, the National Information Exchange Model, and how it enables seamless data interoperability across the justice and public safety landscape. We welcome back two recurring guests in Larry Zorio, Chair of the IJIS Cybersecurity Working Group, and Paul Wormeli, Chair of the IJIS Technology and Architecture Committee and a leading contributor to NIEM. Together, they unpack what NIEM is, why it was created, common challenges and misconceptions, and what the future of the platform is. Whether you're a policymaker, technologist, or just curious about how we can collectively enhance data sharing efficiently and securely across the justice and public safety ecosystem, this conversation is for you. Let's jump in and explore the evolving world of NIEM with Larry and Paul.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of IJIS Sounds of Safety podcast. Today's episode is titled NIEM, Unlocking Data Interoperability in Justice and Public Safety. This is Larry Zorio. I have Paul Wormeli on the episode today. Paul is... he's got to be one of the top experts in the world when it comes to NIEM. And a lot of great things are happening with NIEM right now. There's a new version that is out, or it's soon to be released. And we're going to get into that. And really, for those that are just kind of tuning in and thinking like, what is NIEM? We're going to go over all this. So we're going to talk about what it is, why it exists. Like always on these shows, we like to give you a few use cases specifically around our audience, so justice and public safety and how you can use it. We're going to get into a little bit around like challenges and maybe misconceptions that are out there. We're going to get into the future of NIEM, and then we'll bring it home with how you can get involved and how you can start using it. So with that, Paul, it's great to talk to you once again.
It's a delight to be here with you, Larry.
Yeah, excellent. So I did mention that I personally believe that you are one of the top experts when it comes to NIEM. It's just perfect to have you on today to talk about this. But again, if we're trying to grab somebody in the first 2 minutes of this episode, why should they care about NIEM, Paul?
Well, that's really the key question, isn't it? And the reason that you should care about NIEM is that we know today that interoperability and information sharing is key to the success of building any kind of justice information system. And it's probably best expressed by what Bill Bratton said in the book that he wrote a couple of years ago, which was entitled Collaborate or Perish. In this world today, with all the silos of information systems that we have out there, the only way to make things work better is to share information. In order to do that, you need some kind of basic standards and agreement about how you're going to do that. And that's really what NIEM does for you. And that's why anybody that's working in the field of criminal justice and related at all to information technology really needs to figure out how to take advantage of NIEM.
Okay. All right. So for anybody who wants to share data or receive data, because a lot of people, Paul, want to receive data from everywhere else. But I mean, we can't be greedy, everybody. We have to figure out how we can all share data together, enrich our systems, enrich our investigations, enrich our metrics and our analytics, and really everything that we're getting asked for. I know that a lot of our listeners, either their superiors or town officials or city officials or even the government, is pressuring them to have better analytics, to have metrics, to let them know about XYZ and let them know about trends. And the only way you're going to do that, everybody, is to have good data and to share your data. So let's kind of dive into it. Let's roll our sleeves up a little bit, Paul, and let's go into the journey of NIEM. And what actually is NIEM Open? Like you talked about why it's important, but what is it exactly?
Well, it's really a pretty simple concept. The whole idea is that in order to share data, the way you were just talking about, and to make sure that we're able to share it with all the partners in the justice world, including police, prosecutors, courts, and corrections, we have to have some agreement on things like what are the terms that we're using. Computers are basically dumb, as you know, Larry, and you have to really tell them exactly what you mean by terms so they can read each other's messages. if I send a message to you in French and you don't understand French, then you're not going to understand what I'm talking about. That's what happened in the computer world. In the last century, companies built their systems with their own meaning of terms and statement of how they represented those terms in their databases, so that when your computer sends stuff to my computer, I can't read it. Well, that doesn't help because now we can't share data. So the way around that is to find an intermediary language, basically, which is all NIEM is a way to represent the semantic definition of terms, what the meaning of terms are, and also then the syntactic representation. How do you represent those terms? If you're talking about sending me a message with last name in it, and you call it L name in your system, and I call it family name in my system, my computer doesn't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
But if we have a common definition that we both use, like why don't we just agree and call it person's surname in your system? You can have whatever you want in your system, but when you send it to me, you translate it, you map it into person's surname. Now my computer knows exactly what you mean. So I could read that message, I could put it in my database, I can give it to my users, and it's without any human intervention, so I don't have to print out a piece of paper and hand carry it over to the prosecutor's office. It's all right there in the computer system.
Yeah, Paul, I love that example. You and I have spoke about NIEM many times, but what you just said like really clicked for me, even just with the French example that you gave, right? I'm trying to think of like universal languages that almost like the whole world uses, right? Certainly math. We talk about math and math being a universal language, but even something like maps, like navigating the seas, right? We have latitude and longitude, and no matter what language you speak, we all kind of have similar maps with latitude and longitude lines, and we know which direction we need to go. So with the last name versus how that's registered, I think that really is very interesting because all these public safety agencies, these justice organizations and agencies, a lot of them have their own way of speaking. A lot of them, Paul, I would say the majority of them have their own policies, their procedures, their standards on how they want to do things. So yeah, adopting something like this, adopting in the background some common language can really, really help.
Yes, it really does. And it's really the only way to make it possible to do the justice work better, faster, and cheaper, which is really what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, better, faster, and cheaper. My next question for you is going to be like, what are some of the problems that people are trying to solve with this? And I think certainly faster. They want their data faster and they want their data cheaper instead of having to buy all these different software packages with different integrations and pay for these different APIs and different integrations. You can adopt this particular framework, and it's an open framework, and the costs are going to go down. But what are some other problems that you think this solves other than the broader one around, sharing data?
Having a common language does a lot of good things for you, because then you're able to start thinking about what's the contribution of your work as an agency to the whole criminal justice goal of community safety, and what impact does a pretrial services or a diversion program that the prosecutor have on recidivism? Well, there's no way to answer that question if you can't share the data and common terminology across the system. So you can do an analysis and say, oh, yeah, that program has the following outcomes and that does influence recidivism. Without understanding the flow of an offender through the system, well, we have no basis for coming up with policies that help improve the administration of justice throughout the entire system. So it adds knowledge that we can't avoid getting to because we have to answer these questions. We know that we don't have enough staff in this country to staff criminal justice agencies. Police are down 10% on the average throughout the country, and courts and corrections are also having trouble getting people. We've got to do things faster and better, which means we have to share that information because that's the fuel that drives the justice enterprise. Information sharing. So
that's great.
We just have to do that. There's no real option.
So I know for me, the way I learn is to actually like hear how people are using things. And then when I hear like different use cases, it just triggers in my head like, oh, that's a great use case. I could use that. Or, oh, that's interesting. But you know what? I could tweak it and use it this way, particularly from my organization. So I do want to talk about use cases in general. And I think this will hit home for the audience. Like, Do you have a couple like good examples of how it's being used today?
I'll tell you one of the most powerful examples. I'll give you a couple, but one that's really been effective. About 10 years ago or so, all the states were trying to pass laws to monitor prescription drug usage. And they passed laws requiring pharmacies to report the sale of controlled substances to the state. So all the states built these systems to have this data on controlled substances. And that's what police used, look into prescription fraud and, all the drug violations, but also the substance abuse agencies use when people are overstocking their supply of OxyContin or whatever. And particularly when you cross state lines, you run out of doctor shopping opportunities in Kentucky and you have to go to cross the border to Indiana or somewhere to get more prescriptions. There's no way to compare those different systems across the different states. So there's an association of prescription drug monitoring agencies who said, we got to share data. We got to let the state of Illinois look into the state of Indiana's system to see whether or not we have evidence of doctor shopping or fraudulent subscriptions. So they said the only way to do that is to have some standard to exchange information across those systems. And they said, let's use NIEM. So they built an exchange, and it's actually operated now by the IJIS Institute. So 37 states now have this system in place. So if you're working in law enforcement narcotics in Illinois and you've got a case where you're looking into prescription drug fraud, you can search the system in Indiana and get the data on whether or not that any individuals have used excessive prescription doctor shopping in the adjacent state. The program's been going on for several years now, very successfully, and continually updated to take advantage of the new releases of NIEM as they've come along.
That's great. Were you involved when that first started, Paul?
Actually, I was. I helped design the whole thing at the beginning. I was, at that point, the executive director of IJIS, and we worked with that committee, that national committee of the drug monitoring agencies to get this off the ground, but been sustained since I left IJIS, and it's still running very well and very popular.
Paul, it's great that you were involved from the very beginning. Talk to us about the challenges, at least kind of at the beginning stages of getting these. Well, there's now 37 states. I don't know how many states there were at the beginning, but getting people to agree that this was the right standard and we should choose this one and let's band together and build this. Do you have any insights into how that went and the challenges that they were facing?
Well, yeah, when we started with the functional need for information sharing, which is always important. In the early days of NIEM, people were too focused on the data itself rather than what problem are we trying to solve? And they forgot to ask why. But we kind of nourished the discussion of that group to say, what do you really want to accomplish by information sharing? And how do you do that? Which from that question, you then derive what are the data elements that you need to exchange? Once you do that, then the question is, how do we represent those data elements in a way that we all could agree on? And because NIEM has always had a process of community consensus building about that, we have a methodology in NIEM to go through that process and get agreement by all the players. And that methodology is, I had a role in inventing that back some 20 years ago, and it's sustained and it's been used over and over again, and it's been proven and refined over the years. So it's a way to create a specification then that says, here's how you're going to do an exchange. Here's the actual way you represent the data. So it's just a matter of discussion. Nothing replaces the human requirement to come to a consensus about the importance of sharing and what you need to share. But you got to do that on a win-win basis. What do you get out of it? What do I get out of it? What's the synergism here?
Right. Right.
So that process cannot be eliminated. But once you get some agreement, now NIEM is actually the only program that reaches across domains. Every domain has its own set of standards. You can look, whether it's medicine or law or whatever, or education, there are standards for computer representations. In the health world, it's HL7 and FHIR. But, when you talk about communicating and sending information across domains, like between police and prosecutors and courts, there's nothing. NIEM is the only model of how you represent that data in a way that's harmonized across multiple domains. So it was pretty easy to, once they came to an agreement that they needed to share and they understand the data they needed to share, it's pretty easy to say NIEM is the way to get there.
All right, great. Thanks for sharing that one. What about any more recent use cases?
Well, I'll give you another one that's one of my favorites that I was involved with. And this is kind of close to your heart and what your company does, but the Association of Public Safety Communications Officers, APCO, some years ago was concerned about all the different ways that dispatch centers to talk to alarm companies. Every alarm company that wanted to send their alarm data to the dispatch center for fire alarm, burglar alarm, what have you, had to write a separate interface to every different computer-aided dispatch system. Your company makes one of those, and they said, well, to talk to Mark 43, we had to write a program to do that. And we had to also write a program to talk to the Motorola system, and we had to talk to everybody else's system. And the people in APCO said, can't we have one interface that works for everybody? So we set up a pilot project in Richmond, Virginia, to say, let's come to some consensus on an exchange between the alarm companies in America and the dispatch centers, so that there's one interface that every alarm company can use. They only have to write it once, and we'll put it in place. And we worked with APCO. APCO actually, interestingly, has the ability to create ANSI standards. So we said, well, this is really cool. Let's create an exchange definition based on NIEM that we could turn it into an ANSI standard. So now the dispatch agency and Okefenokee can just put that in their contract and say, when you provide this work for us, you'll follow ANSI standard 12345, which defines how the alarm company will send a message to our dispatch center.
Okay.
Done. Now everybody saves money, because that means the alarm companies can cut the cost of writing this interface.
Absolutely.
The CAD companies don't have to spend money to handle multiple different programmatic inputs. And the communities, cut their cost of getting the solution. But more than that, you reduce the risk of implementing systems. Every time you use a standard that's proven and tested, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You save money and time and reduce the risk of failure. And it was very successful. And what happened in Richmond after they implemented this is that they actually reduced the response time, because they were able to have the system in place that within milliseconds, the alarms were put on the board of the dispatcher using the CAD system to display, the response. Now we're talking about community impact and real impact, all because they use NIEM.
Yeah, that is a great use case. I just think about even just the alarm system at my house, right? Like, or an alarm system at a storefront. Like, how does that information actually get to the police? How does it get to the dispatchers? And it's like, oh, because they're using a standard that everybody follows, and that's wonderful. That's fantastic.
Let me give you just one more biggie, because this is really valuable too. Your work and a lot of other companies. The FBI and the Department of Justice bought into NIEM early on. In fact, the Justice Department was this kind of the original sponsor of NIEM. It was called the Global Justice XML Data Model in the beginning, and then translated into NIEM. But the FBI said, well, we're going to conform to NIEM too. So when they decided to build this new thing called the National Incident-Based Reporting System, NIBRS, they said, well, we're going to make this NIEM conformant. And so all of the data elements in NIBRS are part of NIEM. They're standardized now. The FBI wrote their standards for the states, and the operational standards as well, as saying it will be NIEM conformant, which means every single provider of a record system like your company and others that follow NIBRS is following a NIEM conformant approach to exchanges. You don't have to do 52 different versions of crime reporting like you used to anymore. There are still variations, but they're variations in the data content, not the structure of how it's all put together. That really took off. So NIBRS and the FBI's policy now is that every single thing they do is going to be NIEM conformant. That's one of their top priorities. All the different systems, whether it's index or use of force or whatever it is they create, will be NIEM conformant. So when you're building a solution, as long as you know that, you know what to build and you know what the standards are for the data elements. You don't have to reinvent the wheel as a developer. And states all know that they can buy off of one product that's going to be, a solution that every record system can meet.
That is great. It's interesting just understanding, like, we hear about these things. We know about NIBRs and we know about the APCO example that you gave, but it's like the inner workings of it, like the backbone, like what happens behind the scenes to actually make that happen. A lot of it is thanks to NIEM, which is great. So you touched a few times on these examples on developers, right? And them being able to follow this. If we have a listener in the audience who maybe works for a software company and they're in the justice and public safety space, or maybe there's actually an agency or an organization that thankfully has like a little development team. How can a developer get involved with this, Paul? Get familiar with it, get trained on it, learn how to start using it in, let's say, 30 days from now. I want to start a project. How can they even start?
That's a really good question. And I really have to sort of expand the definition of what is NIEM when I answer that, because there's really three parts to NIEM. The model itself, which now contains over 20,000 data elements and serves 18 different domains. Justice is only one domain.
Wow.
Serves Homeland Security and Human Services. Cybersecurity has a domain. And we're just rolling out a new domain in forensic labs. So the data model itself is extensive, and those 20,000 data elements have been harmonized across all those domains by people coming together and building a consensus. What's the meaning of the word case, for example? Depends on who you are.
Right.
The words you use depends on where you stand. If you're in the legal profession, you use a lot of Latin, but most of us don't speak Latin. But we got to find some common language that we understand.
We do.
So the model is very important. Mm-hmm. Equally important, though, is the methodology for defining an exchange. And that's what you have to learn to answer your question about how a developer gets involved. You have to be able to write a spec for an exchange that follows the NIEM rules. There's a whole set of NIEM rules about how you represent data. The naming and design rules, they're called. And they're based on international standards. Standards like if you're building a new system, say for some organization or purpose, how do you represent things like address? The way you do that is you go to the Postal Service, who are really the experts on defining what address means, and you follow their standards. Well, those standards are built into NIEM. So NIEM collects all the authoritative sources for the meaning of these terms. Really, the de facto standardization for terms, demographic terms in law enforcement and justice comes from the FBI. They define how do you represent eye color, hair color, those kinds of variations, and vehicles and state abbreviations. There's a standard for that. A lot of the standards are actually international in their force. They're created by the International Standards Organization, ISO, to build standards. So the naming and design rules are there to follow that. So you don't have to start over when you decide how to represent the abbreviation of a state, for example. You know how to do that because someone has created that standard. All that stuff's in part of NIEM. So the methodology is part two of all this, of how to write a spec that says, this is what I mean by my exchange. Here's the data elements. Here's how I represent them. Write a schema and give that to the programmers and say, make this work. And you're done, basically. The third part of this is all the tools and supporting work that's part of NIEM, which what you want to do is you got to get some training in how to do this and how to build those chains. There's a whole free training course on NIEM. We need to start using the word NIEM Open because that's the new representation of NIEM is NIEM Open. On the website, you can go there and get free training. Very lengthy, good online course. Also a lot of documentation on how to do this on the web to do that. And there's a community of people who know how to do this. There's something around 3,000 or 4,000 developers around the country who know how to do this. So if you're a new agency and you want to get started on something using NIEM, that you're best off looking for some developers that have done this before in the various companies. Most of those companies, by the way, are members of IJIS, like you are. Mm-hmm. So they have some exposure and expertise in how to do this. But there's also the people in government who have learned how to do this, and they're individual developers, and there's plenty of people that you can hire to help you get started on this. Or you could do it yourself by taking the training and learning how to do it, learning how to develop the specifications and take advantage of the model. So those three legs of the stool,
Okay.
the model itself, the methodology, and the supporting tools, all were paid for by the federal government, and they're all free because the federal government, at least up to this point in time, was smart enough to say, we have to do this in order to solve this problem of interoperability.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all out there to get started. It takes a little work. So, if you want to tell somebody how to get started on this, you go to the website, which is really the new website that really covers all this, is niemopen.org.
Okay.
It tells you all about the model. It gives you access to the training. And there's also a contact us field on that website that is monitored by the NIEM management office. So if you have a question or you want to know something more that you can't figure out how to get more information, use that contact us and you'll get a response. But there's also model exchanges on there. There's a couple hundred different, because one of the rules of this whole game, because this is a community consensus, this isn't some federal thing that's being shoved down your throat. This is people, particularly in the state and local world and the industry, that come to agreement on this. So there's a strong requirement that everyone has an equal voice in this, whether you're in industry or government, and whether you're working in police, courts, prosecutor, corrections, or one of the other domains, you have a voice in setting these standards. And because that's a consensus-based project, the real power of this now is that while the federal government was doing most of this initial funding, it was really kind of sponsored and managed by first the Department of Justice and then the Department of Homeland Security and ultimately DOD. And DOD is currently not providing that management committee work. But the whole notion is that this is a community effort. So the control is now being transferred to OASIS. OASIS is a nonprofit. It's the premier standards organization in the country for data. They built things like SAML, and they built other standards. It's a coalition of industry and government representation that people join and have an extremely powerful and proven vetting process to get consensus on building standards. The whole thing is built on consensus. And that's the way a lot of the standards for data have been developed over the years under OASIS. So now that NIEM Open is part of the Open Project in OASIS, it's a community project, but there's still federal sponsors involved. There's still state sponsors. The state of Virginia is a sponsor, for example. Virginia is the first state to actually pass a law requiring that NIEM Open be used in every new information system development in the state.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's a great background and gives us a glimpse, I guess, into where NIEM's going. Getting close to this episode ending, I do want to talk a bit about the future of NIEM. I've heard that there's a new version that is out or it's soon to come out. What can you tell us? Like, what does the future look like for NIEM? What's on the horizon?
Well, it's very exciting, Larry, because version 6.0 is about to be fully released. It's been done and approved. It's in the process of final staging to become an OASIS standard. Once it's an OASIS standard, which we hope will happen before the year's out, it will then be turned into an ANSI standard. So the first time, NIEM will be an ANSI standard that people can reference in an RFP and contract, and companies can take advantage of and say, okay, now I know exactly what the standard is, I can build to it. So that's a big time change to make it an ANSI standard. From there, OASIS has the power to create an ISO standard, so it becomes international.
Oh, nice.
Just along those lines, NATO is now currently looking at adopting NIEM for all the NATO information exchanges. So DOD has made it a standard for everything in DOD that's new. It's really starting to take off in that regard. But that's why this move to OASIS is so important.
I mean, that would be huge. That would be just so tremendous if we could get this to be an international standard. I mean, you think about that. You think about collaboration with our allies and start sharing additional data with them. That would just be, wow, that's huge. So that is big. That's big news with this 6.0. If we could get to that and get an actual ISO standard around this, Paul. That's got me grinning from ear to ear right now.
And what's making that more powerful is that what's contained in this new version is a sea change in many ways. NIEM was all started back in the days when XML, the extensible markup language, became the way you built exchanges between systems. Actually, I helped write an article in 1999 suggesting that XML was going to be a way that justice could take advantage of information exchanges. And that became the kind of the basis for the first global justice XML model, which became NIEM. But now, people are saying, well, XML was great in its time, but we'd really rather talk about JSON as a way to write exchanges. And that's been good too. But now what people are saying is, we really are looking at things like RDF and OWL and knowledge graph technology. And how can we do that? So this new release, this is a major change in the release. We've created what we call a common model format that's agnostic about how you represent the model. You can do it in XML, you can do it in JSON, you can do it in RDF and OWL. It doesn't matter. The common model format remains the same. And you could translate back and forth between those. So if you've got something that you did in XML and you want to move to JSON, you can recompute the model representation with the tools that we're making available. So there's a tool for managing that common model format and creating the exchange automatically from the model. You can say, here's the data elements I want, and it'll create the exchange for you.
Oh, that's great.
But there's also a new API that's being released at the same time. Okay. And now what you can do is use that API, and you as a company can use that API to actually make your work conformant in a knowledge graph to build the ontology of the knowledge graph directly from that API. You don't have to lift a friggin' figure to do it. You just say, okay,
it's beautiful.
Call that API, and now you've got the ontology. You've got a controlled data model, basically, in a knowledge graph that's controlled to the actual real data in the justice system, not a large language model that sucks in all the crap on the internet, but uses your own real live data, validated data in a knowledge graph to do the exchanges that you can do. But that ontology is completely definable by the API.
That's wonderful. All right, so let's start to close this up. I mean, for everybody, look forward to 6.0, certainly. This is some great stuff. Certainly keep tabs on this API. That's going to be a wonderful tool to use. But to take it home, Paul, you'd mentioned a lot of resources, right? You mentioned niemopen.gov is one. What resources, if any, does IJIS provide? That's the first question. And then second question is, I think there's a big NIEM event coming up, and if you want to plug that in the last minute or so here.
Yes, I definitely do. And
okay.
Starting with IJIS has been kind of the powerhouse behind NIEM Open all along. The industry members in IJIS have recognized the importance of standards, how that not only helps industry by cutting their costs and reducing the risk of building things, but it also makes it easier to provide a standard conversational capability to agencies. So IJIS has been very supportive of this. I just sponsored a webinar a couple of months ago that started to introduce some of these new things, and that webinar is still available, and you can get it through the IJIS website. And IJIS is hosting the NIEM Open Reveal that will happen on November 13th this year. It'll be a day-long presentation hosted by IJIS that will have keynote speakers and lessons from the field, voices from the field on the uses like you're just talking about, as well as more discussion and disclosure of what happens next.
Yeah, so there's a lot of resources on IJIS. They're going to be doing a webinar on the 13th. In the last 30 seconds, tell us about this event that's coming up for NIEM, Paul.
It's a complete disclosure of all the new features of Release 6.0 and the capabilities, and also some discussion about the specifics of what will happen in Release 7.
What's the timing of this event?
On November 13th, from 9 o'clock in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon Eastern Time.
Okay, nice. And that's going to be virtual and live?
Virtual.
Okay, just virtual. Okay. All right, great, everybody. So mark down on the calendars. You'll see things from IJIS November 13th. Pretty much a full day, 9 to about 3 p.m., and it's something to get involved with, and then certainly IJIS's website. All right, Paul, we have to wrap this up. I want to thank you for your time today. Like I said, everybody, Paul is an expert. He's a worldwide expert on NIEM, and we're very lucky to have him educate us and instruct us on where we can go for this. So thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Sounds of Safety podcast. Be sure to stay connected with the IJIS Institute on LinkedIn and X, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple Music, Spotify, or your preferred podcast platform to catch future episodes. From cybersecurity to artificial intelligence and deep dives into critical national data sharing initiatives, the Sounds of Safety podcast has you covered. Until next time.